Hi class, today we're going to talk about the evolution of the cetaceans. We need to address a few key questions. First of all, what are cetaceans? Then we're going to compare cetaceans with other marine mammals. I'll go into the biology of the cetaceans, and then we're going to address a very important question, which is we know mammals evolved on land, so how did cetaceans re-enter the water? We're going to look at the key evolutionary adaptations that had to take place for this transition from land to sea, and we'll do this by looking at fossil evidence and molecular and genetic data. Cetaceans have been around since the early Eocene. That's approximately 55 million years ago. They are in the class Mammalia in the order Artiodactyla. So think even-toed ungulates like giraffe or deer. And there's three suborders to Cetacea: Mysticidae, Odontocidae, and Archaeocidae, but the Archaeocidae are now extinct. Cetaceans are mammals and not fish. We know this based on their physiology and their behavior. Cetaceans have lungs, so they have to come up to the surface of the water to breathe. They have hair before they're born, and sometimes adults have hair on their beaks. They give birth to live young, and they give parental care to that calf. They lactate, and they have smooth skin, whereas fish have really scaly, rough skin. They also can communicate vocally and with squeaks or clicks, and mysticetes have really long, complex mating calls. Some other marine mammals include your pinnipeds, so your sea lions, your seals, walruses, fur seals, your sirenians, your dugongs, and your manatees, and also polar bears. Some general cetacean characteristics include being fully aquatic, carnivorous. They have a horizontal tail fluke. They have flippers. They have an insulating blubber that surrounds their body. And they have these streamlined bodies that have no hind limbs. However, some cetaceans still have the vestiges of the pelvic girdle. Cetaceans have very streamlined hydrodynamic bodies. They have specialized skin that exudes oil droplets and sheds epithelial cells. This helps the water move over their bodies with very little friction. They have an insulating blubber that covers angular bony protrusions and really helps streamline the body. They have fins and flukes that help propel and guide and stabilize their body. So the horizontal tail fluke goes up and down when it swims. That helps forcefully propel the cetacean through the water. The flippers help guide the cetacean through the water, and some cetaceans have dorsal fins which help stabilize the cetacean upright in the water. The respiratory of the cetaceans is incredibly well adapted to life underwater. If you look here at this image, you can see that the nasal passages open at the top of the skull. Whereas if you think of any land mammal, you know that the nasal passages open at the tip of the snout. So an incredible evolutionary transition had to take place in order to get the nasal passages to migrate all the way to the top of the skull. So when cetaceans come up to the surface of the water to breathe, they pull in air through the blowhole, through the goosebeak, through the trachea, and into the lungs. Their diaphragm is positioned at an angle, and when the organs push up against the diaphragm, it pushes the lungs and air from the lungs into the trachea. That way, oxygen cannot exchange with the blood, and a buildup of nitrogen is prevented, and that also prevents decompression sickness. Here is a vertical section of the blowhole in an open position, and here it is in a closed position. They have these air sacs that are thought to actually help with communication and sound conduction underwater. So when cetaceans come up to the surface of the water to breathe, they have to quickly open up the blowhole, exhale powerfully, which is what you see this cetacean here doing, and then inhale very quickly and close the blowhole back again. Cetaceans are conscious breathers, so they have to think when to breathe. Whereas we're unconscious breathers, we don't have to think about breathing. So what some researchers have suggested is that cetaceans can actually sleep with half their brain. That way, at least one half of the brain is always thinking about breathing, and then they can switch that, and the other half of the brain can sleep while the other half thinks about breathing. Cetaceans have a cylindrical shaped body, and that gives a low surface area to volume ratio. They also have a thick layer of blubber that surrounds the body, except for the fins and flippers, and that reduces heat loss. The arteries exchange heat with veins and send warm blood back to the core. That warms the core. But in hot environments, if they need to cool the core, what they can do to prevent overheating is the blood flow can increase to the fins and flippers so that heat can dissipate into the environment and thus send cooler blood back to the core and cool the core. Cetaceans' sense of smell and taste is relatively poor or absent. However, they do have excellent hearing. They have ear openings and ear canals, but it doesn't contribute significantly to sound conduction. However, what does contribute significantly is a fat pad in the mandible that conducts sound to the tympanic plate of the ear, which is then passed to the inner ear. The inner ear is outside of the skull and suspended by ligaments, and that aids in determining the directionality of sound in water. So their hearing and sound production is very useful in communication and also locating food. So cetaceans have very specialized eyes that have evolved to be able to endure life in very harsh environments, especially saltwater environments. So cetaceans have specialized oil glands in their eyes that help protect the eyes from salt water. They also have elastic lenses that can help improve vision above and below water. So the elastic lens can actually move to adjust to be able to see better outside of the water and then adjust again underwater to be able to see better underwater. Cetaceans are very social animals. They often use touch in a social context. Researchers have actually witnessed dolphins petting each other. This here is vibrissae, which are whiskers on the outside of a dolphin's beak. This is the Bodo River dolphin, and you can see just barely the whiskers that are along the outside of the beak. The Bodo River dolphin uses these whiskers to help navigate through very dense waters of the Amazon River that have just overgrowth of roots and vegetation that it has to navigate through. This is a picture of Hans Thwessen, who is over 6 foot tall, holding 2 pieces of baleen from a mysticete whale. Baleen is used in filter feeding and can detect the density of plankton, so they're very sensitive to touch. Odontocetes have a very characteristic morphology. Their skulls are asymmetrical. They have one external blowhole. However, on their skull, they do have 2 nasal passages. They have monophyodonty, so their dentition is all the same type of tooth. They have a very long snout. They have an involucrum, which you're going to hear a lot more of later on in the presentation. So this is an ear bone, and so this thickened portion of the ear bone we call an involucrum. Their mandibular symphysis, where the 2 halves of the mandible meet, are fused. So this actually helps with the impact of grasping prey. This fusion helps with the power force exerted when they grab prey. Mysticetes are also very distinct in their morphology. If you look at the maxillary and the mandible, it shapes this bow shape, and so it's very distinct. Anytime you see a skeleton of a whale, if you see this bowed shape, it's always going to be a mysticete whale. They have two external blowholes. They have a very symmetrical shaped skull. They also have an involucrum, and the mandibular symphysis is not fused. They have a very loose articulation of the mandible in the postglenoid cavity of the squamosal, which is what you can see here, and this allows them to open up their jaws very wide. So some evolutionary adaptations that had to take place in cetaceans is the evolution of monophyodonty. So when whales uh, first came onto the scene, they had multiple types of teeth in the dentition. So not all the teeth looked the same as they do today. This image here just shows these are the right upper molars, these are the left lower molars. We start here with one of the earlier whales, and then we go down to a whale that's extinct now, but closer to the type of whales that you would see today. And this is just showing the evolution of the tooth. And you can see here that these first earliest ancestor of whales, Pachycetids, had very cuspy, high cusp teeth on the lower molars, and they had these, this is an occlusal view, so if you're looking straight on at the tooth, these bumps here are cusps. So they had multiple cusps arranged in a triangular fashion. As you get more and more evolved, the cusps on the upper molars start aligning. There's no longer this triangular shape, and the cusps on the lower molars get more of the same, of equal size to each other. So there's not so much of a difference between the posterior cusps and the anterior cusps. Another thing I want you to observe is how the upper molars and the lower molars start looking more like each other. And you really can't tell from this picture, but since this is an occlusal view and then this is a view from the side, or a labial view is what we call that, you can't really see how similar that they start to look, but they are. If you were to look at these teeth from the same angle, they would pretty much look very close to the same type of tooth. So we start seeing this pattern of monophyodonty. So nasal drift, we mentioned this earlier. In land mammals, you see the nasal opening towards the end of the snout, whereas in whales, you see it on the top of the skull. And so this incredible adaptation that we call nasal drift occurred, where the nasal opening progressively moves more towards the center of the skull. This image here shows the evolutionary adaptation towards this thickening wall of the middle ear cavity that we call an involucrum. So this here is the picture of a middle ear cavity of a modern land mammal. B and C are transitional stages of whale evolution. This would be pachycetid, and this one here is called remingtonacetid. This would be a modern whale. If you look here at this middle ear cavity, this wall of the middle ear cavity, it's very, very thin. If you look here at these transitional stages and of modern whales, it's thickened, and we call this thickening of the this middle ear cavity wall an involucrum. Also, if you notice, there's a disconnection of the medial tympanic plate from the involucrum, whereas if you look here, it's fully connected to this wall is fully connected to the medial tympanic plate. So this disconnection, the gap here between the involucrum and the medial tympanic plate gets wider throughout the different evolutionary stages until you get to modern whales, where it's completely disconnected from the skull. And that is where I'm going to stop. We're going to pick it up here in the next video. I'm running out of time, so I will see you guys in the next presentation.